Good morning, wherever you are in the world today. My name is Herb and I'm an alcoholic. This is a 12-step Big Book precise study, application of the steps to our personal lives. And we've been encouraged to adopt an open mind and heart and to get some assistance. Let's pray for that assistance. God, please set aside everything that I think I know about myself, my brokenness, my spiritual path, and you, for an open mind and a new experience of myself, my brokenness, my spiritual path, and especially you. Please join me in the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. We've been on this journey almost a year together, and I mentioned the core of the rocket launch based on Bill's comment. I believe it's on page 25. We've rocketed into a fourth dimension. There's two aspects of that. Rocketed, how powerful an image is that? But also the image means we're carried there. Oh, we get on board the rocket, we manage the controls of the rocket, but we're taken there. It's kind of like getting on a train. You need to buy the ticket, pack your luggage, get on the train, stay on the train, know where you're going. But the train is taking you to your destination. And I just love that metaphor for us, because here we are now, at least from an instruction standpoint, launched the rocket, and now we're in orbit. As we've heard and began to apply the steps 1 through 9 for the deflation of the ego at depth, we're placed, Bill says, in the world of the spirit. In step 10, we enter the world of the spirit. That's the orbit I'm talking about, the orbit around the light. And since the light is infinite, the orbit is infinite, therefore the light is infinite. And it's totally my experience, not the infinity part, but the ever improving awareness, the ever improving transformation, the ever improving consciousness to make me an optimal human being. I'm using that term based on what Dr. Berger uses. He's a clinical psychologist with 49 years of sobriety, and he's my partner in doing workshops on emotional sobriety. Optimal recovery, steps 1 through 9. Optimal living, steps 10 through 12. We deal with our addiction, 1 through 9. We're done then, according to step 10. Once we finished our 9th step, we're placed in a position of neutrality. Be patient. Be patient. We are placed. Hear that. It's not because you did something right or wrong, or understood or didn't, or were consistent or not, or diligent or not. No. You do the best you can, and you finish the steps the best you can. And it's about being patient with yourself in step 9, not too patient. In other words, it's an assembly line. Keep the cards current. While you're working on one card, have them in an order that you plan to make your amends. Hold yourself accountable to your sponsor or step guide. That step guide buddy concept is so important for us on this work. It's wonderful to have a sponsor. But if the sponsor hasn't done this work, the sponsor will be wonderful in the fellowship and all other aspects of your life, but they will not be as helpful if they haven't done the work the way we're talking about. Now, they don't have to do it in the workshop. There's plenty of resources and people that do this work all over the world now. So I'm not saying that it's an exclusive club. Boy, I am sure not saying that at all. All inclusive. But just because somebody has done the 12 steps doesn't mean, out of the big book, doesn't mean they've had the instructions and or the experience that you've had. Especially when it comes to step 4, especially when it comes to columns 3 and 4. That's very unique to the approach that I was introduced to. Plenty of people that do it that way. I don't have any exclusivity on that. But that's the trademark, really, of doing this work this way. So we're in steps 10, 11, and 12, practicing that. Bill says, when we commence this way of life, as we cleaned up the past. Please hear that. As we clean up the past, meaning the moment we start step 9, the book encourages us to incorporate 10, 11, and 12 into our daily lives. 10, when we're disturbed on the spot, apply the formula. 11, at night, do an inventory. So 10 and 11 are inventory, a follow-up to step 4. Identifying the source of our disturbance, our out of alignment with reality. And then, of course, in the morning, upon awakening, figure out, what does alignment look like today? Alignment with reality. I don't have to use the word God or God's will. I do, but I'm much broader than that. Reality. How does reality manifest today in my life? And you can give it nomenclature of any kind that you want. Higher power, God, energy, spirit of the universe, human spirit, universal principles. We'll be talking about that next week. And then, of course, step 12, which is what we're talking about today a little bit. Chapter 7 is a blueprint. It's titled, Working with Others. The instructions indicate that read that chapter and look for the specific instructions in that chapter from Bill and the group Christians that wrote it as to how to help a newcomer. Find somebody. It's a proactive initiative. Bill and Bob went out to the hospitals, went out to the insane asylums, went out to the jails, went to the missions, because there weren't any meetings at that time. They were attending Oxford group meetings, but Oxford meetings were about spirituality. They weren't about helping alcoholics. In fact, the Oxford group didn't even like alcoholics. That's why Bill left in 1937 and Bob left in 1939 when the book was published. Both had their spiritual experience out of the Oxford Group 6 steps, but they found that it was too limited for them because the Oxford Group had rules, Christian rules, and a Christian mission. Not to say anything bad about them or unhealthy. It was exactly what their mission was. And Bill's and Bob's mission was different. It was to help the alcoholic. It was to help the addict have that transformation through a connection to and an existing and sustaining relationship with power. That's really what many people in the 12-step program miss, those two words I just used. To establish a relationship with power. That's steps 1 through 9. It's guaranteed. In fact, as I said, we enter the world of the spirit. We're placed in a position of neutrality when we finish steps 1 through 9. But Bill says we're not cured. We have a daily reprieve. So we establish the relationship, but we sustain, improve, and enlarge our relationship. Those are the 3 words I use. Sustain, step 10. Improve, step 11. That word's right in the step itself. And enlarge, that word we found in Bill's story and in Jim's story. Jim, the car salesman that put a little whiskey in his milk, failed to enlarge his spiritual life. That's why Ellie's comments at the beginning were so important. We can get this thing, but if we try to keep it, and the intentions are great, you want to continue being a spirit person, but the component that is the most effective in keeping it is to give it away. It makes no sense in terms of logic. it grows as you give it away. Again, the paradox in the spiritual world. It grows as you give it away. It's not your intention. It's not even your intention to keep by giving it away. It's something that's organically happens to most of us with an authentic spiritual awakening. It doesn't have to be step work with a person. It doesn't have to be step guide or buddy. I think it was Mother Teresa said, we can't help everyone, but we must help someone. And that's the organic nature of our human structure. I did a study, I've referred to it during the time on our call, of happiness. A formal study I did about 3 years worth of looking at the research and the literature from psychologists and sociologists and philosophers and theologians, et cetera, et cetera. And the bottom line was, if you want to be happy, have a connection to a meaning other than yourself, and contribute to humanity in your community. Now, does that look like step 11 and 12 from my standpoint? It's perfect. Step 11, a relationship with reality, capital R. A relationship with God, higher power, spirit of the universe. Step 11, improving that relationship on a daily basis. And step 12, enlarging our spirit, our spiritual life, our consciousness through acts of compassion. The reason for Jim's relapse was he failed to enlarge his spiritual life. And Bill, his story on page 14 says we perfect and enlarge our spirit through work and self-sacrifice for others. It's not about alcoholics. It's not about addicts. I have lots of friends who are helping in ways that are very unorthodox, very non-traditional. But they're deeply spiritual people who care about other people, and they help in the way they can. And their invitation isn't the 12-step culture and or helping people with steps and or even going to meetings. But on a daily basis, they are helping their community around them in ways that are their gifts. The word sponsor is not in the big book. I think you know that. We've emphasized it before. In fact, we've looked at, I believe, page 18 before. But in the context of chapter 7 and step 12, carrying the message, it's really important to know, so what's the message? Well, look at the step itself on page 60. Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics. Now, there's lots of answers to the question, what is the message? Lots of great answers. What is the message? But if you are a big book literalist like I am, and you look at the context of the step 12, then at least my only interpretation of the message is that you can have a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. There's many other interpretations of a message. Go to meetings, get a sponsor, pray, help others, lots of messages. There is a solution, lots of messages. I'm not diminishing anybody's attitude or opinion about messages. But if you want to know what the book says, take a look at the context. Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics, that you can have a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. Now on page 18, he comes as close to a description of sponsorship without the word, because the word's not in the pages up through page 163 in the big book. 164, whatever I think it's 164. Anyway, it's in italics. which is the big book's way of highlighting, as we've commented. The ex-problem drinker who has found this solution, what solution? The 12 steps, of course. Who is properly armed with facts about himself, what does that mean? It's important to know what the book means, or at least to have an opinion about what the book means. Properly armed with facts about yourself. My sponsor's attitude was, once you've done your fourth and fifth step, you're properly armed with facts about yourself. You're properly prepared to help other people. Until then, you might be carrying the disease rather than the message, because we are contagious. Who we are is what we communicate. Think that thought. It's a wonderful meditation. We are contagious. Who we are is what we communicate. If we're in the spiritual malady, the bedevilments, that's what we communicate. If we're in the spiritual solution, in the world of the spirit, that's what we communicate. Whether we're talking or not, just by our very being, we emanate this energy from ourselves, and that's what our environment and people in it pick up. Who we are is what we communicate. One of my teachers is Richard Rohr, and he said, we either transform it or we transmit it. Most relevant for the sixth and seventh step, of course. But it's actually broader in the context of my comments, and that is, we're always transmitting. We're always transmitting. And then you have to ask, am I transmitting positive or negative? Because if I'm positive, I'm transmitting positive. If I'm negative, I'm transmitting negative. It's just about being conscious and making choices. Can generally win the entire confidence of another alcoholic in a few hours, but not because you know something, although that's really helpful, but because you have an experience. Until I did the steps out of the big book, I was not very successful in sponsorship. Oh, I could tell people about meetings, and I could sit with them in quiet, and I could help them with their fourth step as I had experienced it, which was very superficial. And I could listen to their fifth step, but not effectively. Once I did this work at 4 years of sobriety, I became an effective sponsor because I had not only the knowledge, but I had the experience. Until such an understanding is reached, little or nothing can be accomplished. Totally my experience. Then he has this wonderful paragraph, which really does profile, I think, the major vision statement or ingredients of a sponsor. That the person who is making the approach has had the same difficulty. In my case, an alcoholic. In your case, a food addict. It's very difficult for me to connect to your experience, really. Oh, I can listen and I can be compassionate and I can learn from a variety of sharings. But if I don't have that personal experience, I don't really know what I'm talking about. And you know that. I've been quite candid with that on our journey. Has the same difficulty, that he obviously knows what he is talking about. That was the magic that converted Bob into a listener, Bob Smith, when Bill came to visit him. Bob was going to give him 15 minutes. They ended up in there 5 hours because Bob said, this is the first guy who understands what I'm experiencing and who has concrete recommendations. That it's not a moral issue. It's not a learning issue. It's not a willpower issue. None of those. In fact, I'm powerless. I need to find power. And there's the motive for me doing the ninth step. And he finally overcame his embarrassment, his humiliation. And he went out after doing some surgery the day after he got sober, or the day he got sober, and finished his ninth step amends and stayed sober for the rest of his life. That his whole deportment shouts at the new prospect. That's what I was talking about. You've heard it I believe, said of either St. Francis or St. Augustine. Augustine was a 4th century bishop who was a rather big rascal in his day until he was converted. And then he became a priest and then a bishop, St. Augustine, 4th century. He said, wherever you are in the world, carry the good news. At that point, he's a bishop, and he means by that good news, the Bible and the Christian message. But listen to the rest of it. Wherever you are in the world, preach the good news if you have to use words. Who you are is the good news. People will read who you are. We're all good animals, and we know what's safe and what's real and what's not real, even unconsciously if we don't know it consciously. That he is a man with a real answer, that he has no attitude of holier than thou. See, this is not a one-up, one-down situation. This is not a teacher-pupil situation. This is not a parent-child situation. In some cases, it feels like it looks like that and probably is that in some cases. But the point is, humility is the truth. We're all the same, just at different levels of development. No attitude of holier than thou, nothing whatever except the sincere desire to be helpful. Reading that line one day, I had a spiritual awakening because the voice said to me, drop the word service, Herb, for step 12. Drop it. It's too sophisticated. Use the word help because it's got earth in it. It's got dirt in it. You will be frustrated. It will take your time. Use the word help. And I've been attempting to use the word help ever since to represent legitimate 12-step work. Some people get confused, especially professionals, the therapists, the psychiatrists, the medical doctors, the social workers, and many of them have real trouble with their program because they've adopted the attitude, well, all day long I'm helping people, that's my service. Wrong answer. It's not service, you're getting paid for it. When you're getting paid for it, it's a career or a job at the very least. Anytime you get paid, it's a job or a career. Service is for free and for fun, to quote Chuck C. He wrote The New Pair of Glasses, a wonderful classic book here, at least in Western United States. Chuck C., Chuck Chamberlain, father of the Chamberlain actor. But anyway, Chuck C. was probably a universal minister of some kind, very bright, very articulate, very funny. If you get a chance to listen to any one of his recordings. He died in 1984 when I first came in the program, and so I never met him, but I'm very impressed with his approach and his practicality. A sincere desire to be helpful. If you have any trouble distinguishing between help and enable, that's what Al-Anon is all about. Al-Anon has made a science of that distinction. Helping will save people, enabling will kill people. It's really that simple. And it's not a science. I don't mean that it's got that kind of credentials. It's an art form, something that you learn through practice, but other people's experience also. I went to Al-Anon in my 10th year for about 6 months, just to see if there was anything that I would connect to. I'm married to an alcoholic. One of my daughters is an alcoholic. My father was an alcoholic. I was eligible for Al-Anon. But at the end of the 6 months, what I found is that I needed to recommit to my own addiction and my own program. And that's when I did the work for the third time, 10 years sober. And it was a wonderful 2-year contemplative process that solidified this work for me and enabled me to write the first book on the Guide to the Big Book, because that man dictated his instructions to me. And after each sentence, he would ask me to read it back so that I got it exactly right. I mean, including the commas and including the periods. That there are no fees to pay, no axes to grind, no people to please, no lectures to be endured. Please, as sponsors or step guides, hear this. No lectures to be endured. We're not parents. We're not therapists. We're not police, step police, or food police. We're a sounding board to make suggestions. And you've heard me say it before. When I sponsor, there are no rules. Bill Wilson was very clear. There's only two disciplines in Alcoholics Anonymous. One is alcohol and one is God. You're either going for one, he said, or you're going for the other. Think about that in the dimmer switch context. It's either going up or it's going down. You're either getting spiritual or you're getting spiritually sick. There's no in between, and there's no neutral, and there's no stopping, and there's no pause. That's what he says in step 10, doesn't he? Not cured. Daily reprieve based on the practice. He doesn't use the word, but I do, of 10, 11, and 12. No people to please, no lectures to be endured. These are conditions we have found most effective. After such an approach, many take up their beds and walk again. We don't make a sole vocation of it. It's not our career, it's an avocation. I mentioned Chuck C. For fun and for free was his comment. I don't think I mentioned that. For fun and for free. We feel the elimination of drinking is but a beginning. A much more important demonstration of our principles lies in our respective homes, occupations, and affairs. So, next week we'll take a look at those principles in the Way of Life document. There's a profile on sponsorship, which I have accumulated over time doing a workshop on sponsorship and asking people what they found as an experience is helpful. AA has a pamphlet on sponsorship, and it's good, basic, easily read, short, based on their experience and recommendations. But there's a book published by Hazelton called 12-Step Sponsorship, which is my go-to book. I've read it 3 different times in preparation for my workshops. It's simple, it's very straightforward, it's based on experience, and he has lots of suggestions, how to be a sponsor, how to be a sponsee. The one item that is in the profile in the Way of Life document that I like the most is that the person is enjoying their sobriety. What a great criteria. That they're enjoying their life, they're enjoying their sobriety. So these are questions. Your life is on the line, and not only that, your happiness is on the line. So it's important to interview your intended sponsor or step guide to find out what are their knowledge, what is their experience, what are their expectations. I suggest that to people, and then be clear on, as a sponsee, what are your expectations? And have that conversation. It'll be different for different people. I had a person come to me saying, after a little while, he wanted to be my friend and hang out. And I had to tell him, I have enough friends and I don't hang out. I never heard from him again, but that was his choice. As I've made mention before, and you have to see my hands, I'm not sure you can. Let me just tilt this a little bit. If I make a suggestion, there will be consequences if you take it. If I make a suggestion and you don't take my suggestions, there will be consequences. As my sponsee, you choose. I'm not invested in your recovery. I'm not invested in your happiness. I'm not invested in your failure and your relapse and your unhappiness. I'm compassionately energized by attempting to communicate as effectively as I can. But I'm not in charge of your decisions and the consequences of your decisions to the actions that you take. You are. I don't have any rules with regard to sponsorship. Now in AA, that's a lot easier than probably stronger suggestions in your program, at least to establish some stability in the beginning. All right, we'll pick it up again next week. Thank you all for your participation. Please join me in the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Thanks, everybody.